We talk about digital health as if it's something that my 85-year-old grandmother is comfortable using. Not a chance. No, not going to happen. So that's also another thing we don't fool ourselves thinking about. We want to develop a digital twin for every person on this planet that's going to be able to predict what's going to happen to them based on external factors like exposome, genetics, digital signatures, population health. And my dream is to be able to predict those things.
Welcome to the Beyond Pitch podcast, where we dissect some of the most impactful startups. And today we have someone who's building a Shazam for all the respiratory diseases. Imagine having a phone inside of your face, and not only you can diagnose, but also monitor all your respiratory diseases. Now, the founder, she's coming from India, and she has managed a lot of teams in multiple companies, even Nokia, Microsoft, and she has even managed her own startup in the past. Welcome, Arshia Gratiot. How are you doing today?
Hi, very good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now let's straight dig into it and talk about the problem. What problem are you solving?
So respiratory diseases, as you know, have the largest disease footprint across the globe. And when we talk about chronic respiratory diseases, it includes asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is a catch-all phrase for chronic bronchitis, emphysema, fibrotic diseases, COVID now, long COVID to top everything off. And this is not going to change. I mean, these diseases, unlike, with other diseases, that footprint is only increasing because to a very large extent, it's impacted by climate change. And we're seeing that, things are changing rapidly across the world from an environmental perspective as well. So it's only just escalating. It's only just adding to the burden on healthcare, especially from respiratory diseases. When COVID happened, what I realized very quickly, because I was living in the UK and all we knew at the time was that COVID impacted the lungs, was that we were all at risk. But we didn't know why we were at risk. Is it because we had existing conditions? Is it because we just have poor lung health and it's genetic? There was nothing. And that really made me think about why that is the case. We don't do baseline lung function tests for anybody. It's not part of standard of care. So how are we supposed to know what we're meant to be doing? How are we supposed to know who needs to be more careful than other people? And that was really the genesis of Eupnoos. And that was also why we decided to tackle respiratory conditions, unlike the more sexier conditions, like cancer, for example, or heart failure, any of that. So that's really the reason why and the background to what we're doing.
Interesting. And how did you come across this problem? Of course, COVID-19 was a reason, but what was the story behind it?
The story behind it was that, I worked in tech for as longer than I can remember, really. And it was in the early days of technology, much before you were born. And back then, we were looking at smartphones and we were, looking at the early days of machine learning before it became so mainstream that people don't even think about filters when they're using various applications. All that is pretty, complex machine learning at the end of the day, but we don't think about it. When I got into technology, all we had was spell check. And even that was magic at the time. But what we also knew that things like smartphones had the ability to change people's lives. And when you come from India, you see an example of it when somebody can look at crop prices using SMS and they don't have to go to a different, market, for example, and kids can get educated using smartphones. So truly transformative. And all of that, and the things that actually make that possible is the infrastructure around it. So connectivity and also the sensors in the phone. So I was actually part of the team that launched Maps on a phone. It was called OB Maps back in the day. And it was so interesting because, when you meet people in developing markets like India, the answer was like, oh, we don't have addresses. So where are you going to put on a map? And when you speak to people in developed countries like the UK, it was like, I have my A to Z. Why do I need to do that? I'll just ask someone. So we had all of these incredible responses because people are at the heart of everything we do. And then we had to think about how can we look at other sensor inputs. So things like contextual information. Okay, so you know that you have your A to Z, but can you tell if the shop is open or not? How do you know it's not closed today? So you add that situational awareness layer into it. So what I'm talking about is multimodality. What I'm talking about is bringing different data inputs together to be able to lead to an outcome. So we were doing this for a very long time in other industries. When COVID happened, what I started thinking about, and also because of my previous experience with my first startup, which was looking at autonomous navigation, and we started off with vehicles and then we moved into drones. And the thing that makes navigation possible is sensor fusion from various types of sensors on the device. In a drone, it's accelerometer, camera, radar, LiDAR. These are all different pieces of hardware, all producing different types of data output, but you synthesize it, you fuse it, and then you come up with an outcome. So we said, let's take that engineering approach and put it to healthcare, because this is one industry that's stuck in the past. This is one industry where we're still using devices and approaches that were invented centuries ago. Stethoscope, spirometers, case in point, nothing has changed. So how do we bring this new era of digital sensing, digital analysis, digital diagnostics, using ubiquitous devices, smartphones, 85% market penetration, fantastic. And how do we give people the ability and the power to be able to identify what was going on in their bodies? We chose lungs because if I was to breathe out loudly, you can hear it. If I was to breathe out softly, you cannot hear it. Direct correlation between sound and flow volume. So it just seemed like a natural fit for us to bring our engineering know-how into a clinical domain to be able to give people the tools they need to prevent diseases. We are in the prevention end of the spectrum. So long story short, that's how we came into doing what we were doing. And that's why we chose to get into this area of respiratory diseases, because the physics exists. And there's enough and more use cases in engineering to be able to prove that the concept can work.
Definitely. Really interesting part that you took sensor technology from different industry and then you moved it into a startup that can affect so many lives. But if we talk about affecting lives here, COVID-19 has passed and we know that respiratory diseases is on a rise everywhere around the world. So what do you think?
Correct.
What is if you put on a number, how many lives are affected from this problem at the moment?
Yeah. So how many known lives, right? So the number of known lives, okay? Because remember, a lot of us are undiagnosed.
Okay.
Right? So I can give you UK numbers because that'll probably set it into context for you. And then you just multiply that by 2.5 for worldwide numbers. So we spend 1.6 billion. The small little island spends 1.6 billion on asthma and COPD, right? That'll give you an indication. There are 350 million people who've been diagnosed with COPD, but we believe there are 2 million people, the missing millions, as we call them, that are yet to be diagnosed even though they have poor lung function, right? Those are the numbers we're looking at right now. With asthma, 1 in 10 people are impacted globally. And those are people we know of. Long COVID, who knows? The jury's out. We're still trying to learn what that long-term impact is going to be. We know it's fibrosis, but is it just fibrosis, right? So we don't know. This is my point. So we know that we have a lot of people who are impacted. We're looking to treat them because healthcare has traditionally been reactive, right? We don't have biomarkers for early disease because we've never included people with early disease in clinical trials. So what do we even know what early disease looks like? What do we even know what to look for? And the sad thing is that diseases are actually treatable when they're early, right? They're easy to treat. They can be treated at scale and they can be affordable. Now, another thing I love to talk about, and it's really the reason why we got into respiratory, is I'm asthmatic. It took me about 5 years, maybe 6 years to get a diagnosis. And it only happened because I landed up in A&E. I couldn't breathe. I had my children, panicking, crying, saying, "Mommy, don't die." And when that happens to you, you realize that this is not something in this day and age that we need to go through. Why? Right? So I have a very personal reason for doing what I'm doing. So this is why we decided to go after respiratory. This is why we decided to look at very mass diseases that impact all of us. And we decided to go after syndromes and conditions. Asthma is a syndrome. You don't have a single point of care test for asthma. You cannot have a single point of care. And for COPD, you use spirometry, which we know is archaic and doesn't work for the most part. So huge problems, huge gaps. And we're trying to change that entire paradigm and try to focus on diseases when they're very early on. Now, with asthma, COPD, fibrosis, We're looking at diseases which have been around for a long time, which have a lot of very affordable medication and also have generics, meaning that everybody has the opportunity to buy medication. It doesn't matter where you live because you can afford it. So it just seems like the logical thing to do to be able to give people the tools so they can treat themselves. It's not like cancer. It's not like heart failure. You can afford to survive and live your best lives.
Definitely. I think problem is increasing and it will continue to increase, and we need solutions, something like this. And to dig into the solution that you're building right now, can you explain us what you're building and how you're building it?
Yes. So, like you very rightly said, the best way to explain what we do is to use an analogy like Shazam. So Shazam, as you know, is very much about pattern recognition, right? Everything about data analysis is about pattern recognition. So it's a known and proven approach to how we're applying machine learning. So basically what Shazam does, just for people who are not familiar, is that there's an app, it lives on your smartphone. When you listen to a piece of music and you want to identify what the song is, you just Shazam it, you press a button. It captures about 3 to 4 seconds of audio, depending on how popular the song is. And then it's able to give you a match. It'll tell you the names, and it'll tell you the title, the singer, and the album. That's metadata, right? And the way it does it is very simple. It's pattern recognition. So it's creating a print of that song, and it's matching features with an acoustic library. Shazam's owned by Apple. They've been around for the last 15 years. People don't understand how old it is, actually. And so they've accumulated a lot of data, and so they're able to do it very, very fast, right? If they don't have the data or if there's a lot of noise in the background, it takes longer. It's just pattern recognition and it's audio processing. Now, what we're doing is very similar. All the patient needs to do, very simple, smartphone, app, hold the phone in front of you, breathe out. Keep going, okay? Empty your lungs completely. What our technology does is, first of all, it cleans the audio. Because we're focused on the real world, we haven't done any testing in controlled environments because that's not where our technology is going to be used. It's going to be used by you and I in our kitchens, most likely. So we clean the audio spectrum, we remove all of the extraneous noise, and then we look for that portion of the audio spectrum which gives us the maximum acoustic biomarker stack for every disease, and then we match it with what we already have in our biomarker library. So from the point of launching the app to completing the test, it takes about 20 seconds. Now, when you compare that to the current standard of care, right, you're looking at between 1 to 8 years to do exactly the same thing. So that's how the technology works. So the larger our data library, the faster we can diagnose, the more we can diagnose, and the more diverse the number of diseases we can diagnose are. So this is a horizontal platform. It's not a vertical platform. It's not a point solution. What do I mean by that? Lungs, heart, and other parts of your body are mechanistically connected, right? The lungs inject oxygen into the blood that comes from the heart so that it can power your brain, it can power everything else. When you can't breathe, no oxygen in the lungs, everything falls flat after that. Simple. So what we know is that nobody ever has a single disease. It's usually comorbid in this day and age. We're seeing more multimorbidities and comorbidities than we are with single diseases. So what we're doing is you blow into the phone, and what we then do is put that breath sound through multiple models. It's an ensemble. So if we put it first through our obstruction algorithm, because asthma and COPD are both obstructive diseases, meaning that there's a lot of phlegm in the airways, and so the air gets obstructed. Now, if it's a yes for obstruction, probability scores are provided. Then it goes into the asthma model. If it's a yes for asthma, you get the result. If it's a no for asthma, it goes into the COPD model. If it's a yes for COPD, it says COPD. If it's none of the above, then it goes into the restriction model. Now, in the restriction model, it's basically fibrosis. So it's a bit like if you put a balloon inside a glass and you try to blow, it just doesn't expand, right? That's fibrosis. So it goes into the fibrosis model. And over here, the diseases that are, so fibrosis is symptomatic of ILD, interstitial lung disease, and fibrosis and all of that. And that's a disease by diagnostic by exclusion. So you can't say yes or no. So instead, we just say it's fibrosis. We screen for fibrosis. Now we're building a model for heart failure because heart failure and COPD are comorbid. So they exist very closely together. When you have left side ejection fraction failure, meaning the blood is not leaving the heart, where does it go? It goes into the lungs. So in the pleural cavity, you have liquid. We've done some very early studies now to prove that you can actually hear it. So that's where the differential disease comes in. You blow once, we put it through all of these different models because they all have overlapping symptoms, and then we give a probability score. Now that's the diagnostic decision support side of things, because we're class 2 device, meaning the clinician will then finally see yes or no. Okay. Now what we also do is measure lung function. So it goes back to what I was saying. What is your baseline? Where are you on that spectrum? So that's basic lung function assessments. So we're also doing that. We're using clinical indices, but we're creating our own novel acoustic-based biomarkers for them. So clinical indices for lung function assessments is FEV1, forced expiratory volume in 1 second, forced vital capacity, and then the percentage. And that percentage is based on predictive scores using something called a global lung index. Now, there's a problem with global lung index because, surprise, surprise, no data from women, or maybe not enough data from women, from people from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, people who are mixed race. We're just not representing the world in its purest sense. So what we've done is taken away demographics. So we don't need to know where you're from. We don't need to know anything else. We just look at the audio spectrum and we tell you your lung function. Are you or are you not? So you're using you as a control because we all have different backgrounds. Nobody was born with a baseline, right? We don't know. So we're using where you are right now as a baseline, and we're looking at fluctuations, right? So that's pure lung health wellness to tell you where you are. So that's the package. That's how the technology works. And because it's a horizontal, it's a platform, it can be applied to various disease conditions. You can have different models tagged onto it, and you can also use it in different diseases. It's like a blood pressure cuff. So what does a blood pressure cuff do? It's oscillometry, right? It's measuring whether you have hypertension or hypotension. So hypertension, hypotension are conditions. It can tell you your measurements, and then your doctor will tell you whether you're hypertensive or hypotensive. But what it also does, or where it can also be applied to, is diabetes. It can also be applied to different cardiovascular conditions. It's just a measurement. And the way the scores are being interpreted, the composite scores are based on that disease, and it's just being interpreted, right? So we want to be that product for lung function, for disease biomarkers. We're a horizontal. You can use us in sleep apnea. You can use us in diabetes. You can use us in drug-induced fibrotic disease from cancer drugs. We can use us in dementia because if you're not getting enough oxygen in your brain, dementia sets in. So there's a lot of different applications, and that's how we plan to certify ourselves as a horizontal. And that's why we have patents on how you collect the data, how you process the data, as from a lung function perspective, also a disease biomarker platform, because that's where we want to get to.
It is interesting that you can diagnose so many diseases just with the audiography. It's quite interesting. And now if you want to, like you said, that in Africa and these countries which are really poor, if you want to delve into that, given the diversity of the smartphone technology and the accessibility, especially in low resource settings where, let's say, the phone is really old or the microphone is placed into a different location of the phone, how does that work with Eupnoos? Do you have a global solution, or do you have it specific to a specific model?
Thank you for that question. Super pragmatic question. So we've tested on devices from 2012 onwards, right? So the reason why we've done that is because most of the microphones have already reached, almost all microphones actually now. But in 2012, the microphones that we had in devices for the most part had already reached that frequency threshold that we need. We don't measure high frequencies. Voice is high frequency. We actually measure low frequencies. Breath is low frequency, right? So what we do is do a frequency response test. So once you download the application, We check the metadata. We check to see what model of phone you are, what software version you're running, etc. All of that happens in the background in any case. And then we ping the phone. We do a frequency response test. Is this phone going to pick up the frequencies we need, yes or no? If the answer is no, then what we basically do is say that to the user, saying, listen, not going to work. Let's try vowel phonation. So what we found now with our technology is there are certain vowel sounds, okay, not words, because words we don't agree with, accents kill it. It's a lot of health inequity. People can't read very well, all of that. I can't read in my glass without my glasses, can't read anything. So a lot of those issues. So we're looking at sounds instead, vowel phonations, which are in the harmonic spectrum. Phones are optimized for harmonics, for phone calls. So which is why we're looking to see how we could address that gap. If your phone is not able to perform, then let's look at something else, a different type of spectrum of audio that we can pick up. That's how we're approaching this problem.
And now, if you have to address the biggest question about the accuracy of the result, what are the false positives? What are the true negatives?
Yeah. So we are a screening device, right? At the end of the day, a diagnostic decision support system. So what we know is that we have to be better than the current standard of care. Now, if you look at asthma, the current standard of care in the guidelines, okay, is 62% specificity, right? So can you pick up and say, is this asthma? That's the answer, specificity. So from that perspective, on the data set that we currently have, our specificity results are actually 94% for asthma. Okay? Sensitivity is lower, and sensitivity is what you actually need for a screening tool, because if you have a high probability, you're sent for secondary testing in any case. So sensitivity is what's important. Now, as we add more data to our data set, we only just increase our sensitivity levels. And currently for asthma, I need to just pull up my latest results, because we've just updated our models again. This is our second version of our application.
And you train it in real life situation, or is it lab based?
None of this is lab tested. None of it is. So we do everything externally validated. We actually haven't done any lab testing at all.
Even better.
Yes. So our sensitivity is 94% for asthma. Our specificity is 81%. And our overall accuracy is 92%. COPD, sensitivity is 75. Specificity is 98. And the overall accuracy is 94. And in general lung function, which is the FEV1, FVC, PEF, we have an area under the curve of 80%, which is what you need for longitudinal tracking. Now, in terms of spirometry sensitivity in primary care, this is where you're going to find this quite interesting. It's between 23 to 47%. This is what doctors are able to tell you. And specificity using spirometry to diagnose asthma is between 31 to 100%. It's really the luck of the draw. Are you symptomatic on the day that you're presenting? That's basically when spirometry is going to even pick it up. Otherwise, it doesn't. Peak flow variability sensitivity is 60% in primary care. Specificity is 66%. And from a clinical assessment, to be able to tell if you have asthma or not, which is basically listening to your chest with a stethoscope and asking you questions, sensitivity is 46%, specificity is 80%. So I think you can see where this is going, right?
Definitely. It's quite astonishing that you have reached the 94% accuracy. And as to how many people have you tested on? What's the data set?
So for the area under the curve, so the actual lung function measurements, which is what people are using en masse, we did a proof of concept study with the Ministry of Manpower of Singapore, part of the Workspace Health Institute, basically. And there we did a screening program on 700 people who worked in a shipyard in Singapore. And that formed our core data set, where we had them do quality assured spirometry. So we had our clinical team on hand that was screening them using the current standard of care, calibrated quality assured spirometers. And then we had them blow into the phone. Right. So that was our training data and also our validation data. We were able to do a 80-20 split on it. And we were able to show that we have an increased area under the curve of 80% for FEV1 FEC. In terms of the asthma and COPD diagnosis, that was a small study that was done in the UK in collaboration with the University of Southampton and also a charity called Care Assure. And that's people, older people who have a lot of lung conditions. And then we also did students because we wanted to have a very good split of age groups and not just look at people in the older end of the spectrum. So from that perspective, I just want to be absolutely, accurate about my numbers. So our sample size for asthma was 38. So the 38 people with confirmed self-proclaimed asthma. And that's 38 people with 3 files each. And COPD was 41 with 3 files each. So very small, and we appreciate that. But we know that as we have more people coming in to the funnel, we're only going to be able to improve and show repeatability across a larger population as well, and replicability as well. And for that reason, we're fundraising to be able to do a large-scale trial where it's a powered study. So we want to be able to have a clinically significant population size that will prove without a doubt that this technology can be certified as a medical device and used to change people's lives.
What is the sample size that you think would be required to have a regulatory compliant use this up?
I mean, that's another very, very good question. We don't have a comparator, right? So we can't say that, people have done studies like this in the past and they've used X, Y, or Z, or there is a device that we can compare against. So we're in that very, I would say, opportunistic area. But at the same time, we have to generate more evidence than anyone else would have to. So our closest, I wouldn't say comparator, but a company that we can even pull up and we try to explain or talk to regulators is a company called ResApp-DX. They were acquired by Pfizer. They did a cough diagnostic. So their validation data set, so what they used, it was a data set the algorithms never seen before because that's what you need for a clinical trial, was 1,000 patients. And it was a split between different disease areas. So we've set ourselves that benchmark. We want to be able to have 1,000 patients because we're going for CE Class 2A certification. It means it has to be representative of the European population. So which means that it needs to be a sample set from Europe. And then we'll have to do the testing. For Americas, same thing, FDA sample set from the US. So that's kind of what we're looking to do. Now, it's a really interesting time for us in digital health. So I spoke to another entrepreneur at Medica recently who's developing a cuffless blood pressure monitoring system using the smartphone flash. And he got CE Class 2A certified. Now, obviously, he could compare to a cuffless blood pressure and then prove, equivalence. But we had this discussion saying that the regulators are struggling a little bit because, they were used to analog devices in the past. So stethoscopes, this, that, and the other. And now suddenly you're looking at a completely different modality for measurements, PPG in the case of blood pressure, acoustics in the lung function for us, and so on and so forth. So they're also changing in terms of mindset, and they're not so closed to being shown the data to say, look, we meet all of the ISO 13485 standards. We're safe, right? Patient safety is absolutely fundamental, and we're not going to harm anyone in the long term. And we will do post-market surveillance. So what are you arguing with? And here's the clinical trial data. No, you don't need 1,000 people. You actually need enough to show significance, which is a powered study. And that's what you should be looking at. So it's a narrative. It's a movement. It's something we need to start doing. We're not doing it as effectively in Europe as they are in the US, which is why you have something called a breakthrough designation. We don't do that here. And I think it's fundamental. We need to do it here. But I'm optimistic. That's why I'm an entrepreneur, that things are going to change. And hopefully we'll see more of these kind of new generation devices that are going to disrupt traditional pathways.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea. Holding your phone in front of your face, and then you can tell in 20 seconds, as you said, that if you will face a respiratory diseases in future or not. So this solution, if you look into, solves 2 problems, is detecting early signs, and the second, it detects at your home.
That's right.
So which are really definitely good signs for a solution. And just to get more into technical side, can you tell us or maybe show us how this how the app really works. Yes.
Spectrodata, yeah. So basically what you're seeing over here is the various parts of the application, the user interface, basically. So you have somebody holding up the phone, you have to breathe out with force. Now, typically, if you're using a spirometry device as a mouthpiece in there, and your lips will form a seal around the spirometry device, around the mouthpiece, and that's basically how you ensure that you're not closing your lips this way. Because when you close your lips that way, you're basically causing clipping. When you're driving down a road and you have the window down, you hear that. So that's what clipping actually means. So you're not getting an accurate idea of turbulence in the lungs. That's what blowing out with force does. It causes turbulence in the lungs. In the case of a traditional spirometry device, it's a tachometer. There's a little propeller in there, moves, and that's how you measure flow volume. In our case, because it's acoustics, the first thing is getting high-quality data. The data acquisition piece is fundamental to us. So for that reason, we've spent a lot of time. Again, I will stress, in the real world, we don't do laboratory testing because that is not our use case. That's not where people are going to be using our device. So in the real world, we use the smartphone camera as a data guiding, a coaching coaching tool, and then we also use, depending on the device, time of flight camera if it's an iPhone, and if it's a new iPhone. Otherwise, we use other sensors. For Android devices, completely different, and we look to see how far the person is from the phone. So we guide them to move the phone back or forth so that they're the optimal distance from the phone. And before that happens, we sample the environment to be able to understand where the noise floor is. Then when the person has the phone at the right angle, we guide them to keep their mouth open at a certain opening size. Because if you do this, you're impacting the flow volume. If you do, very different story. So you're not blowing soup, you're fogging the mirror. So we guide them to be able to do that as well. So we've patented this entire process of how we do it because it's so fundamental and it was so difficult to get right. So that's the first side of things. So sampling the background, understanding where the noise floor is, then the patient is guided through doing the test in the accurate way. I can't go into details, obviously, because that's our patent. And we follow, or we try to be as close as possible to ARTP ERS standards for quality assured spirometry. So we get the patient to blow out 3 times because that's what the guidance says, even though we don't actually need it. We're trying to be as close as possible. Then we pick the best of 3 in terms of the test that's going to be sampled and then processed. And what we then do is translate the acoustics into a flow volume curve, which is basically what you're seeing here. This is a flow volume curve. Instead of having the volume over time, we have the acoustic spectrum, so time over frequency. Now we've translated or cleaned the acoustic signal to be able to form the curve, and we're finding a very close correlation basically with flow volume. And what clinicians typically do is they look at the shape of the curve to be able to identify the type of disease and also whether the test was done in the right way. So quality management is also fundamental. If you cough, test is null and void. If you start early, null and void. Stop early, null and void. Don't blow out for long enough, null and void. So we have to go through all of those quality assurance standards as well. And then once the test is correct, someone has managed to achieve the right maneuver, then we translate it into spirometric indices. And that goes back to what I was saying about lung function. So these are typical clinical spirometry indices, and we translate them into acoustic surrogates. So it's FEB1A, FECA, PEFRA, and the percentage A. So that's how we go about providing that data to clinicians. Then we also provide the diagnostic report. So what is the probability of asthma? What is the probability of COPD? And lung health is restriction or obstruction, simply because I was saying to you earlier, you can't give an ILD or diagnosis without chest tomography and clinical adjudication. So that's the way the test is done and the way the results are presented. Now, very sophisticated patients will be able to understand what this is. A lot of us, who don't understand spirometry or don't understand how to read spirometric indices, just want to know whether we're okay or whether we're not okay, and what we need to do as a consequence. Do I need to go see a doctor? Do I need to take some steps, for example. So for patients, the interface is completely different. And for clinicians, you're going to see a lot more detail because that's what they're going to use to make the decision. Now, in addition to what we're seeing here, which is what the current standard of care is and how we want to match it and be able to integrate into guidelines, because we have to provide guideline-focused care, we're also looking at identifying other symptoms. And by other symptoms, I mean nocturnal cough, which is a way to phenotype people with asthma, whether it's cough-induced or not, and also identify other biomarkers like sleep apnea-based symptoms, for example. And for that reason, we were doing the whole cough recording, nocturnal monitoring side of things. And there are quite a few companies doing this. But our focus is on seeing how we could then merge that data in patients who need it, because not everyone does, and seeing whether we could give a more specific diagnosis and also go into the type of asthma rather than saying it's just asthma. So that's kind of how the whole thing works.
I like it that you emphasize more on the quality of data, which you take into consideration. Definitely different than traditional spirometry, where we take second the time by the volume of the air that is intake. So that is definitely something I like. But what are the chances of a misdiagnosis in this case?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you prevent it?
So this is why we say that we provide the diagnostic probability score. So diagnosis is about probabilities always. It's never going to say yes or no. Nobody will ever make that mistake because of the liability, right? And then it's really up to the clinician to say the final yes or no. So this is how we manage risk, because we're a medical device and we are audited and we have very strict quality management standards that we have to meet. So every single risk under the sun is something that we have to mitigate. So that false positive false negative is actually worse than false positive. So that false diagnostic assessment may be nothing to do with the actual maneuver or the technology. It could be because someone has a really silly case on their phone. Human factors, right? This is the real. So we have to have all of those considerations in mind. So for whatever set of reasons, if there is a problem with the signal to noise ratio, and we don't know what it is, because if someone has a case, they have a case, what can you do? We will then say, you know what, let's do the test again in a couple of hours, or let's do it tomorrow. Now, if it's happening again and again, 3 times, there's an issue. Then we say, sorry, but test is not working for you at this point in time. Please go see a clinician. That's the default. Or the other thing that we're looking at doing is typically there are a lot of evidence-based questionnaires. These are part of clinical guidelines. So for asthma, it's the ACT asthma control test that usually happens after somebody already has a diagnosis, not to diagnose. But you have things like the COPD assessment test in primary care. You've got the dyspnea score, MRC or St. George's questionnaire. It really depends on what you're using. And they're all meant to be screening people by asking them subjective questions about their own symptoms. So if we believe that there is a very high probability that this person does have a disease, then we would also then point them towards answering those questions from all of these evidence-based questionnaires. Now, we don't have to prove whether they work. We don't change the questions because it's already being done and it's part of clinical pathways. So we just integrate that into our flow. Goes back again to risk management. We have many, many gating factors and many checkpoints built into the application so that we don't have these problems. And I'm really proud to say that this is what makes us different from what's out there. You see many, many cough diagnostics. You see many vocal biomarker diagnostics. I am always looking for quality assurance within those applications. I'm always looking to see what have you done to make sure that things are not going to go wrong for that patient. And some of them are not in our control, but we have to be transparent about it and we have to be very clear what we're doing to be able to address them. And it could also be, I'm sorry, but this test doesn't work for you. It's not about the money, it's about the result.
I see that there are no direct competitors who are building a similar application, but they are competitors who are trying to do something which can affect or which can diagnose early. but they use physical product for that, not an app.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk to that a little bit as well. So, we see our competition coming from two areas. So if we look at, like you said, direct competition is very much hardware. So right from spirometric devices in lung function clinics, I mean, I wouldn't say that's a direct competitor, because we'll never be able to get to that level of accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity. And there's a very good reason why it's in a lab, right? So that's not something that we would ever go against. That would just be sheer arrogance. What you do have are handheld spirometers and home spirometers. And there's some very good companies developing some excellent products to be able to do that. But it's hardware, there's a high cost of ownership and everything else that goes with hardware. We know this. We would say that those are for the very sick patients. So people who have cystic fibrosis, for example. And there's a lot of trials around cystic fibrosis in the developed world, because that's where there are therapies and the government pays for them. And you have excellent companies doing this, and every single report has human oversight. So there's somebody in the middle looking at it and translating and providing interventions, right? So that's what happens there. Then you have the other applications in the market. Most of them are voice biomarker based, or they're cough based. ResApp is the only one that provides differential diagnosis, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why they got acquired. I mean, good for them. That's excellent. Whereas the other companies that we're seeing, and things are always changing, so I never get too comfortable. But at this point in time, you have people who are looking at voice biomarkers coming from speech, vowel phonation, yes, and cough. Now, the use case that they're looking for is symptom monitoring, not diagnosis. And they're certainly not looking at differential diagnosis, because this is the hard part of the market. It's the most difficult industry we could have gone after. But that's where the biggest unmet need is. It's not in symptom monitoring as much. And that's my personal opinion. And it's also because I'm looking at countries like emerging markets, Brazil, India, parts of Indonesia. There's no gold standard. There are no pulmonologists to a very large extent in many, many parts in these areas, as in their consultants or specialists. And there's a huge lack of healthcare access and resource, let alone hardware. So it's these people we want to help, and so they don't need to compare with spirometry, because you need to be trained to be able to interpret the results. They just need to know, do I need to go see someone and get a medicine or not?
At the current stage that you're building Eupnoos, the app, what's your strategy? Do you want to do a B2B or B2C? Because here you can, in far-sighted regions, a clinician can also use this app where they don't have the access to the hardware side, or people at home can also use it. So what's your initial target at the moment?
Yeah, so initially B2B2C, we want to be able to offer ourselves up as a technology enabler into other people's platforms. So imagine you have a telehealth platform servicing, I don't know, Southeast Asia, for example, or the US or wherever. The primary cause or rather the largest cause for primary care visits is usually respiratory conditions. And they could be upper respiratory, so cough, cold, those kind of things. In telehealth, it becomes very difficult to listen to people's lungs. How? The doctor will listen to your chest. They're listening for wheeze, basically. They're listening for crackles. They're listening for all sorts of things. But if you're having a telemedicine consultation, that is not possible. Objective measurements are not possible. So in this particular use case, what we want to do is be able to have that person blow into their phone, blow into their laptop, blow into their tablet during a telemedicine consultation. The doctor can guide them. He's seeing how they do the test. Or we can still use our AI. It makes no difference to us, really. And then the doctor will see the results on the right hand of the screen. And they can, make their assessment. Or before the appointment, 10 minutes before, do a test. Report is sent to the doctor. He's looking at the report and talking to you. That will be a live telemedicine consultation to be able to enhance the current offering in telehealth, right? The second thing we're looking to do is to work with governments, big pharma, anybody who wants to be able to do large-scale screening programs in various countries, to be able to capture those missing millions that I mentioned earlier. So in this context, because we're a smartphone app, it becomes very easy to scale. All you need to do is send an SMS saying, do your test. Click on the link. Go straight to the web app or go straight to the app store, whichever one you use, download the application, off you go, right? So there are very different permutations and combinations of how we could potentially go to market. The other way would be to look at traditional hardware manufacturers, Virograph, Resmonics, all of the different people who actually make these hardware devices that are being used in clinical practice. Now, those are, again, purview of people who can afford it, but there's a huge range of people that they can reach with their branded devices through our app. It becomes a software as a medical device, which is an adjunct to traditional spirometry. And it can be a pre-screening device to get people into the funnel. So those are the various use cases, go-to-market strategies that we're evaluating. But, right now it's really about getting it right. And that's the reason why we want to be able to work with partners, collaborators, people who have experience of the industry and have a good idea of where things are going, because it's all about dynamics. Things are changing rapidly, and that's kind of what we're focused on at the moment.
Last time I was honestly looking at my phone, I was thinking that, okay, it's 10 years down the line and there are different people in, let's say, Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, India, you're using this app doing it on my phone. And I was also wondering that if this app never existed, how would you think this problem would have been solved?
Would it be solved? No, I don't think it's ever going to be solved. It's not something that I think we can completely solve either, because of a couple of reasons. The first one is that it's an ever-increasing, footprint of people. And as much as we like to believe that everybody's familiar with using smartphones, that is not the case. We talk about digital health as if it's something that my 85-year-old grandmother is comfortable using. Not a chance. No, not going to happen. So that's also another thing we don't fool ourselves thinking about, right? So as my younger people, okay, chance of penetration much, much higher. Chances of being able to have active users on the application much higher. COPD, no. Average age, 75. So what we're doing as well is we're looking at health inequity. We're looking at social determinants of health. We're looking at educational literacy, health literacy, technology literacy. We stratify patients. That's a piece of work that I'm very passionate about. And we're actually scoping out what those scores could look like to be able to make sure that the people who are using our product are the right audience for this product. You see? So maybe, as people die and people are only living longer, as the 45-year-olds today become 85-year-olds tomorrow, maybe in 20 years' time, yes, we could have 90% penetration, 95% penetration, because smartphones, we're hot-fired into our phones and we know what to do with them. Until that happens, I don't see the massive scale of change in terms of preventive medicine, because again, we're talking about preventive medicine here, that we'd like to achieve. Next problem, capacity building. Okay, so we screen lots of people, we flag them all, and then they come into primary care, and your GP is absolutely overwhelmed, your doctor is absolutely overwhelmed, and they say, can't deal with this. And then they start pushing you away because you're saying, you've just added to my caseload. You've just increased my liability. You've told me that, Mrs. Gupta, 85 years old, has COPD. And if I don't respond now because I cannot, and something happens to her, who does the liability sit with? So there are some fundamental issues here, and these are macro issues. So, all we can do is try to facilitate. All we can try to do is address our user experience to be as friendly as possible for everybody. All we can do is also look at the health economic impact of where there are resources, where we can make that change. What is that point of contact with the patient when the treatment is most optimal and efficacious? How can we do this? And that's how we approach it. We're very pragmatic. And we work within these limitations and we strategize where we need to go now, next, in the longer term, based on what we see as a changing dynamic.
And if we talk about what would be a North Star 20 years down the line, if you have to summarize it in one paragraph, what would that be? That you cannot achieve by money, what you want to achieve with your product?
We want to develop a digital twin for every person on this planet that's going to be able to predict what's going to happen to them based on external factors like exposome, like genetics, like their digital signatures, like population health. We want to have all of those factors looking at you now, not some notional human being in a lab. And my dream is to be able to predict those things using all of these multimodalities of data for that particular individual and be able to personalize their pathway based on what's possible for them in life. It's not everyone has time. Not everyone has resources to go to the gym, all of that nonsense. It doesn't happen. We want to look at where you are. We want to look at helping you get to a healthier life based on what you can do and what's possible for you. That for me would be the North Star. And this is across the board for all conditions.
And let's now we delve more towards the team and who is working towards this North Star before we get into the 5-question round. Tell us more about your CTO and about the team. I of course know that they're really experienced and they already have, I guess, PhDs.
So in terms of the team, this is the core team, and what you're seeing here is a mix of people who come from practically every important function or area of expertise required for a company like ours, like any company for that matter. Now, as I said to you earlier at the start of the podcast, we're looking to see how we could fuse engineering and clinical practice together. And that's been the DNA on which this team has been built, and also the people that we have helping us get to that target and that North Star. So the gray rectangle is basically the leadership team. So myself, Dee, and Salman, we are the founders of the company. And between us, we have commercial experience. Dee is an intensive care doctor who's also been a lawyer, who's also helped with setting up almost 30 odd startups. So a polymath. Everybody in this slide are polymaths. I mean, geniuses. Salman is a professor of respiratory and chair of national health, National Heart and Lung Foundation at Imperial College, and he has been responsible in developing a technique called FTO, forced oscillometry techniques, which is a completely different way of measuring lung function. And he's involved with pharma, and he does a lot of investigations on drugs and so on and so forth. So again, an absolute giant in his field. Jordan is a professor of AI and machine learning. He's worked with other very, very large companies that are named after alphabets. And he does a lot of work in the neurosciences industry, but it's also looking at how we could bring that learning to help to what we're doing, systems biology. Everything is connected. So we're able to really go across the entire spectrum in terms of how the leadership team is forging the path for the rest of the team to work with. Madhi, Dat are both engineers, software engineers, computer scientists, data analytics. Both have worked in respiratory. I think that's the important thing to add. Bioinformatics and engineering within the respiratory field, using hardware and software and big data. So they bring that knowledge to it. Chaz is very interesting, ex-Royal Air Force officer, a musician, and that works in the acoustics industry. And he brings that knowledge of ISO, for example. I mean, the Royal Air Force, they're dealing with very large different things. So he knows how to do quality management like nobody I know. And he's sorry. And he's an acoustics engineer, so he understands how to deal with the data that we're working with and what to do with that data. And he brings that expertise to the team. Graham is he's an advisor of ours, and he's based out of the US. And he's also a physician in his past life. So he has a great understanding of the US market, which is very different to us in Europe. And he's helping us with setting up our footprint there in America when we decide to get our certification. But it takes time to build those relationships. Professor Crespo, she's a professor of cardiology, especially in heart failure. And she brings that experience to the team to build out the next indication, because that's our next pipeline indication with the process of creating prospective data for this. And she brings in the clinical experience that we need to be able to correlate engineering with clinical sciences. so that we have that robustness in what we're doing. The logos in the bottom really speak to where each of these people or where all of us come from. So we're not spring chickens. We've been working in very large corporations for decades. And so we have that knowledge of how to scale businesses to get to that point. I think a lot of people who come from pure startup backgrounds, I believe we're limited in terms of what we believe is possible. We don't imagine being a $100 billion company in the future. We don't know how to build the infrastructure required to IPO, the infrastructure required how to scale, because right now you're just fighting. Like, how do I survive from day to day to day to day? But when you know how to interact, and you know how to think at that scale, and you also know what that scale is thinking about when they look at you, you're able to plan. You're able to have that strategic roadmap to be able to exit in the future at the scale that you wish to, because it's very personal at the end of the day. So we bring that genesis of or synergy, because we know what it's like to work in small companies. We've been entrepreneurs. We've worked with very large corporations. And we had these incredibly talented young people who are, injecting new ways of thinking, new ways of doing.
Now that we have discussed so much, let's dig into the 5-question round. There are like few questions that I think that would be interesting to you. The first one is, what book, person, or a movie has influenced you deeply?
I'm a science fiction buff. And it's not Interstellar. No, the 3-body problem. I don't know. Yeah, amazing. I would highly recommend people read this. It's a Chinese author. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his name, because I'm sure I'm going to make a mash of it. So I'm just going to say the 3-body problem. And there's an entire series of books that that he's written, and you will wonder, how much of this is actually based on fact. So yeah, so those are at the moment my favorite books in terms of what's influenced me. I'm very politically aware. I care deeply about what's happening in the world, and I'm a big believer in trying to change things and to be part of that if you want to make things change. And I think I know it's very, very cliche, but I really enjoyed reading Harari's books. Yeah. And, there's always been a question about who would you invite to the table if you were to have a dinner party. And I think that's a great thing to see exactly where people's politics are. And my answer used to always be Merkel. I think she's amazing. I am such a fangirl. And that's pathetic, but I am such a fangirl of Merkel. I like Angelina Jolie very much for what she stands for, and also, what she does and how amazing she looks. Indira Dewey, there's a bit, that'll be make for a very interesting conversation, I think, to a very large extent with her, because there's also a few things maybe that could have been done differently. Another very cliched answer, my mom. I come from a family where my father died very, very young in India, and my mother raised us, and she used to be a very successful entrepreneur, won an Udyog Patra award, engineer, one of the few graduates from IIT Madras back when women didn't get into IIT Madras, one of 5 people, like that. And she sent me away to the UK when I was wasting my life in India, just running around with the wrong people. And that was a massive leap of faith in her, on her part. And, it was not cheap. She did it, made major sacrifices, and took the risk that it could have gone horribly wrong, because I was a total rebel. I got expelled from college, just wanted to put it out there in India. And here I am today, and those are the people and those are the things that have influenced me.
I think your mom took the right risk, and she could see where you are right now, really successful in your field, managed large teams. And if you talk about productivity, what is the best way you manage productivity? Because I know that you travel so much, give so much speech. How do you manage your productivity the best way?
Yeah, I work 24/7, sadly, and I'm glued into my phone. I do a lot of my work on my phone, and I do a lot of things on the fly. So I am actually extremely efficient with my time because I need to divide it between my family. And I've also realized that I have to be extremely conscious about my health. So I try to carve out time for a workout as much as I possibly can. And I don't leave things for later. I just do not procrastinate. So I will get stuff done as soon as it comes into my inbox. And I try to be on top of things every time. And I don't hesitate to delegate. If I cannot do something, I'm not sitting there like this. That's not me. I'll always ask one of my co-founders, saying, guys, I can't do this. Please, can you step in? I don't let it get to crisis. So I think that's the key thing, and that communication channel constantly open with my team is something that I think keeps me super productive and on top of what's going on.
Talking about working 24/7, how do you find a relaxation hobby outside work to switch that work mind off? Of course, you talked about the working out, but is there anything else that you like to do?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you'd asked me this question maybe 20 years ago, I would have said I go to Ibiza every year and I love dancing. I love electronica. I'm a total party animal, used to be. And, that's how I used to relax and go on amazing holidays. But now it's not the case at all. I listen to audiobooks. So my me time, my time to relax is I just put my audiobook on, just lie on the couch, listen to that, or when I'm walking or on the bus or whatever. And I like cat videos. I like animal videos. So I sit in the evening watching ridiculous cat videos and animal videos with my kids and just have a laugh and listening to dad jokes on Instagram, things like that. Nothing highbrow.
Well, it's all right. I think we all need to be a little silly every day in our lives so that keep us cool and calm and know that we are living life and not working too much.
Exactly.
And just moving at the last question, what is the one piece of advice you would give out to founders?
Yeah, I would say get a corporate job before you start your own company. Definitely get a corporate job. Make money before you start a startup. Startup is not for people who don't have money to support themselves. All of this nonsense about, you can live on cup noodles, that's bullshit. You cannot. And the other thing, be prepared to answer when an investor says to you, is this your full-time job? And why is your team not working on this full-time? Because usually the answer is because they have mouths to feed and rents to pay. And to expect people to give up everything, and especially when you're an older founder, is absolutely ridiculous. So make some money, know how to answer that question in a way that's going to make them think that you know what you're talking about, and that comes from working in corporate because you become a politician. And and just enjoy the ride, like the people you work with. Otherwise, you're going to be miserable. And get good advice from older people who've been there and done that, because you will get people who take advantage of you, and you need to be able to see through it in a flash.
Well, I guess that's one of the perfect advices we have got on the show. And it just brings us to the end of the podcast. And I really appreciate that you came here and talked about Eupnoos. It is a wonderful time that we spent so far. And I would love everybody who is watching or listening to go on to eupnoos.com, EUPNOOS, and check out what they're doing. Contact Arshia if you have any questions. And thank you for coming.
Thank you and good luck.